Welcome to the Women Talk podcast, where ordinary women share their extraordinary stories. We would love for you to share your story on our podcast. Go to www.womentalk.ca and apply to share your story. And now let's welcome your host, founder, and CEO of Women Talk, Bridget Lessard-Diel.
Welcome back to the Women Talk Show, where women make their communities stronger, one story at a time. How do you survive that dreaded door knock at 3 a.m. in the morning? In 1994, Sheryl Anderson lost her soulmate, her best friend, and her husband in a car accident. And she was not only dealing with deep grief, but also had a 3 and a 6-year-old. How do you move on? How do you start a new beginning? That is exactly what Sheryl Anderson did. Let's listen to Sheryl's story.
So July 30th of 1994, my husband was killed in a car accident. He fell asleep at the wheel, coming home late one night on the highway, and he rolled his car, breaking his neck before the car stopped. That night, I lost the love of my life. I lost my soulmate. We met at 19 years old on a cruise ship on Lake Winnipeg. He was a deckhand and I was a bartender, and we knew from the moment that we met, I knew at least, he had no concept of what was going on. I knew that he was it. He was my guy. And as crew on a cruise ship, we were not supposed to, quote unquote, fraternize, but we always found ways to find each other within the, working on the ship. After Barry died, life changed so drastically after that. All I wanted to do was curl up in a ball and shut the outside world down, and I just couldn't. I had 2 daughters that were 3 and 6 at the time, and they needed me. So for the next few years, I watched my children spiral. Pain and the anger were constant. They lashed out at me, and I was the only person that they could. I was their safe place. Now, personally, I was barely functioning at home. Everything felt like a struggle. Work was a different story, though, because I knew what to do there. It was the one place that I didn't feel clouded or confused or in that chaos that comes from all the grief and the pain that I was watching my children and feeling myself. At night, my mind just wouldn't stop. I couldn't rest, and sleep was usually fleeting. And I remember waking up at the same time every night. And it was the time that, I got that knock on the door, and there was some psychological thing going on there. And it took me years before that would stop. And if somebody asked me how I was feeling, I would say I was fine. I was fine. But in reality, fine is a 4-letter F word. So, I was feeling like nobody really understood what was going on. And in reality, I was really angry, or I just really didn't feel anything at all. I was shutting down my feelings. I could say all the right things, because after a while, people don't really want to know how you're feeling. It's uncomfortable for them. So I learned who I could tell and who I couldn't. And that just really perpetuated my indifference. I was a highly functioning person living in neutral. The car is running, the lights are on, and occasionally I get it into gear, but it would slide back into neutral and come to a rolling stop without me even realizing what was going on. And so at one point I knew that I needed to start life again. And in Manitoba, there was just so many memories and things. So I moved to Alberta. I needed some kind of change. I didn't know what, but I thought moving would be the answer. And it was funny because my husband and I were actually moving out of the small town in Selkirk, Manitoba that we were living in, and Calgary was the place. So I thought, let's just finish that journey. And, in retrospect, I look at that and I knew that I was running from my feelings. Now I look at that and that the memories, the feelings, everything that was around me. So in Canmore, it was great to be in a different place and starting fresh. Yet that was probably one of the lowest moments in my life. I was alone. I was afraid, had very little support for myself and my children, and we were barely functioning. I always would get into this place of anger anytime I had to make these big decisions for me and my kids. And I was so angry at Barry for dying and leaving me to deal with all this stuff. And my indifference became so palpable. It scared the shit out of me. And I knew there had to be something better for us. So soon after that, I started searching, and long story short, I found Reiki in Canmore. And it was very synchronistic on how I found the Reiki Master. She actually happened to live like 5 houses down from me. And I stepped into that space of finding that energy, which I knew nothing about at the time. And for the first time in years, I could finally feel something, actually feel something. Feeling the energy move through my body, out my hands. It was profound. And that started my journey to healing. I took my Reiki training and eventually getting my master's in USUI, Karuna, and Seichim Reiki, and life got better for us. I was calmer, and anybody that knows that has children, the better the parents are, the better the children are. So my kids, did great. I would give them treatments, and I started practicing and doing treatments and having Reiki circles. And eventually I realized that we needed to move because Canmore, there was so little support for us. So we moved to Calgary, second best move that I ever made. And I was teaching classes and connecting with the community, and life was getting a lot easier. And then I call what spirit stepped in. It was a long weekend. I was at a conference in Las Vegas, actually Lowe's Lake Las Vegas, at an entrepreneur conference, and it was over 2,000 people. And I was learning so much, and there was so much to take in. I mean, there was a lot of people moving around and a lot of high energy, and I needed to take a break. So I was walking around in the grounds, beautiful, beautiful garden, and I came upon this tent, and it looked like this huge white revival tent. And I walked inside, and there's like nobody around, no signage, no nothing. So that whole forgiveness, permissions thing. In I go, because I figured somebody's going to stop me if I'm not supposed to be here. So in I go, and I see this big cloth, like it was 50 feet in circumference. It was massive. And it looked like it had a big flower on it. I wasn't really sure what it was, didn't know what it was, and I was really curious. And all I saw off to the side was, take off your shoes before walking. Okay. And there was an obvious entrance, like there was an obvious opening in this, there was a path. So took off my shoes, dropped my bags, started walking. And I walked to the center, and I realized it's like, well, what do I do now? I'm really not sure. And still nobody's in the tent. There's no signage, nothing's going on. And I thought, okay, well, I didn't want to disrespect anybody by just walking off this beautiful cloth. So I turned around and I walked back out. And when I stepped out, I realized that there was something different. My mind had stopped chattering. I felt calmer. I had a sense of feeling grounded and confident. And it was like a light bulb that suddenly turned on, that I realized that being centered allowed me just really feel at a deeper level. So at that point, I started doing more research around what this was, and it turned out to be a labyrinth. And I had no idea. So, I dug deep into the information that I could find, and a labyrinth is very different than a maze, but the labyrinth allows you to feel and come from a place of creativity and intuition. And you get an opportunity to have abstract thinking, because a labyrinth is very much like when you're driving the car, and I hear this all the time. People are driving and they get the greatest insights or inspiration or ideas. It's because your left brain is occupied keeping you safe in between the lines. And your right brain has an opportunity to step in. So that's really what happens when you're in a labyrinth. And connecting the dots, I realized that I was moving from my head to my heart. And I was thinking more about what that felt. Getting centered and gaining awareness and then speaking from that space is a really, really powerful tool. Now, can you imagine what I felt like I was feeling overwhelmed and in chaos in this group of people. And then I stepped into a totally different space. It was amazing. I feel really grounded now. I use the labyrinth all the time. I'm proof that moving from frustration and overwhelm into feeling clear and grounded is an empowered space. It wasn't easy. And there were times where I felt like I was on this path of, rocks and stones and hills and another corner and something else. But I always know that there is a place to come into. And there is this beautiful center that I get to step into. And that's how I found it. And it's a better path for change and allows me to be a better person. I bring my best self out.
Do you want more out of Women Talk? Sign up for our Women Talk membership today. Receive discounts at all of our live events, talk on more stages, receive free monthly webinars, or host a webinar yourself. Join this powerful sisterhood we call Women Talk. Visit womentalk.ca/membership.
What an unbelievably difficult situation to deal with such young children. Now, how do you keep his memory alive for them, having lost him at such a young age?
For them, it's really about the stories. It's really, my oldest daughter remembers more than my daughter Janelle does. She was 3 at the time. And for them, it was about, having photographs, telling stories. What would Dad do? How would we do that? What would Dad think about this? And even to this day, we go through different phases. My oldest daughter got married and she was feeling quite melancholy. And we stepped into a space together because it really brought us together as a family. We are really it for each other. And we have a lot of strength between the 3 of us. And, I sit and I talk with her from an open heart of what would your dad do? And how would he feel? And as sad as that sounds, that really gives a lot of strength. And she finds strength there.
Do you think it's made you closer to your daughters?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, I found over the years that thinking about that, I had to step into a space of, I needed to decide whether or not I was going to empower them with knowledge and information to keep them safe, because I had to work. I had to let other people look after them. And in that place, I really had a lot of confidence in what they did. And we always, our table was always open. There was always crazy conversations going on at the table. And even their friends would come over and they would go, ask your mom this question. and I'd be like, okay, well, what's the question? And sometimes it was girl stuff and sometimes it was other things. But it was really about, giving them the right information. I didn't give them a lot of stuff that they didn't want to know because they just want simple information. They don't want all the emotions attached to it.
Yeah.
And now we're really, I've overheard my youngest daughter and even my daughter Meg say that, Mom, when I really want to know something and I want somebody to support me, I call you. I don't call my friends.
Nice. Wow.
Yeah.
What a great compliment that is.
Yeah. I really love them to bits.
So that night, what was the first thing that went through your head? And I don't know if you remember when you heard those words that he had died. What was your first thoughts?
It was interesting that night because in Selkirk, we lived in an old farmhouse, so we didn't have a doorbell. And it was, Barry and I used to go out at night. He would go out with the boys and I would go out with my girlfriends. And we knew that having time apart was really important. So it was his night out. And I would always fall asleep on the couch or in bed, but I wouldn't quite fall asleep until I heard the key in the door. And then I would rest. Well, that night we had 2 big dogs out in our yard too. And one of our dogs, he would bark at anything. He was our doorbell basically. And so that night it was 2:13. I remember the time, 2:13, and the knock on the door. And I woke up and I thought, well, that's really weird. He doesn't have his key. What's going on? And the dog didn't bark at all. And I go to the door, which I didn't think was unusual. But I see the two RCMP standing at the door. And my first thought was, why wasn't the dog barking? The dog hates anything in a uniform, like any policeman, milkman, like mailman, didn't matter. And they walked in and they were telling me what was going on. And I remember sitting at the table and I had my head down on the table. And all I could think of was their shoes. Oh, he's got shiny shoes. His are a little muddy. So my mind had totally deflected away from everything that was going on. And I just
completely shut down.
Completely shut down. Completely just avoided the whole situation.
And then the next day when you got up?
So it was an August long weekend, and my family was spread out at, everybody was up the lake, and so they're asking me, who do we call? And I said, well, I have my mom and my stepdad. My mom, they both had been remarried, and they were both at two different opposite lakes in the north, in northern Manitoba. So they called my younger brother, who was in Stony Mountain, and he drove 2.5 hours to the lake where my dad and my mom were, and they came down. And I remember them walking into the house, and the first thing that, like, my mom just took control of the situation. She just like, you're going here and you're going there. And the police officers were so amazing. Like they just really, they didn't really even say anything. They sat and they held space for what was going on in the room. And I remember my kids were waking up and I knew I had to tell them. And Meg was the first one that came down the stairs. And I sat with her and I told her that Daddy had died. And I knew enough not to say pass away, gone to heaven, any of those things. Like I knew that enough. And I said,
and why is that?
Well, because I never really believed in giving these weird names for kids that they, suddenly they go, well, passed away. What does that really mean? And they get into this fantasy place, right? And then they start making up stories. And I thought, no, this is, Barry and I were really adamant about, these are the proper body parts and this is what they're called. And this is what, what grandma is. And this is, so we were really good at making sure that they really had a clear understanding of what we were talking about. And it was interesting because Meg was on my lap and I was cuddling her and I'm crying and she just sat there and she didn't cry, not a tear. And then she said to me when I was done, and it's like, okay, so what do you need? Like, what do you want? And she's like, can I have breakfast and watch TV? And I'm like, okay. Fine. And that's what she did. My mom made breakfast for her. And then Janelle came down, and Janelle being 3, she was more connected to me emotionally. And 3-year-olds, they'll, you start crying, they cry. You laugh, they laugh. So I cuddled her up and both of us just cried. And I think that was what I needed more so, is to have that closeness with her. And my dad and my stepmother took her out to the lake that day. They were having a garage sale out in Lake Winnipeg at their cabin. And so they took both the girls out there so that I could deal with my stuff. And my mom took me back home. And my stepmother called me later on that day. And she's like, Sheryl, I got to share with you something that happened. And I was like, okay, well, what's going on? And my dad's a police officer, a retired police officer at the time. And of course, they had this community of EMS, police officers, firefighters, and they all come and help each other out. I mean, that's what they do. They're in service for each other. So I guess the girls were, organizing things on the table, and Janelle was trying to sell things, and her 3-year-old self, she knew enough that I'm trying to sell this thing to you, dude. And there's this big burly police officer standing there, and he's like, well, how much is it? And she looked up at him and she said, well, it's for my daddy. He's dead.
Wow.
And this guy just crumbled. Like this.
Oh, wow.
And it was matter of fact. She's like, and he's dead.
Yeah.
And so, I found it so interesting. I said, Susan, so what happened? She goes, and then she just proceeded on her merry way, selling and giving away stuffies and doing whatever. So, yeah, it was.
Their little minds are so adaptable.
I know, hey? They are so resilient.
It's amazing.
In that.
What was the hardest part of you losing your husband and having 2 young kids? What do you think was all of it is extremely hard, but what was the most difficult to deal with for you?
It was always when I had to make decisions. And some were big, and some, like I had to make a decision of whether or not, we lived in a small town. I worked in the city. So I had to decide if I was going to sell the house, because we were already getting ready to sell the house. You know, do I sell? Do I stay? What do I do? And I always got into this place of anger. Like, I always got so angry at him. I just wanted to just like, why did you do this and leave me having to deal with all of this?
Mm.
And as they grew and became teenage hormonal girls, it came up quite a bit more. But that was usually the place where I really found the challenges.
So what was an answer for you to deal with that particular issue? So it was very difficult to make decisions. So did you find an answer that to help you deal with that?
Well, you know, in the beginning, it was really, I leaned on my mom. My grandmother came and lived with us for a few months. And that was like such a gift, because
so you would ask them to help you with making the decision?
Yeah, I was in such a fog that, you know, for somebody to say, what are you doing next week? I would look at them like they had three eyes. I'd be like, I can't even conceive that. Don't even ask me that, because I can't even think that far.
So you talk about moving on a little bit later on, and something woke you up, and that you wanted to move, you had to move, and you moved to Canmore. So what was that one thing that kind of jolted you out of the fog a little bit?
So I was getting ready to go to a friend's wedding, and I couldn't go into the church. I was so angry at God for taking my husband and leaving me with two young children. And I couldn't understand, in my mind, the constant question was, how can this be something that is good? Like, how could there be a God that supports me, which I believe fully, and do this? So I couldn't step into the church. So I phoned the couple and I said, I will come to the reception, but I apologize, but I can't come to your service. I just can't come to the church. And they said to me, well, Sheryl, you know, when are you going to get over this? And I got so angry. And I was like, and part of it too is the church was in close to the small town. Like, I had to go towards the small town that we lived in, and there was a lot of memories going on there. And so that was the point where I just went, you know, I can't start again here. Like, I just can't do this. There's too much around me that was a constant reminder.
And do you think that was the right decision then to move?
Oh, it was the best decision I ever made. Yeah. Absolutely. And even my girls say that now. Like, we've been in Calgary now Calgary for 20 some odd years. And yeah, Calgary's home. Alberta's home.
Nice. So tell me about Reiki. What was it that was calling you? It's a very intriguing modality.
It is. You know, when I found Reiki, I had no idea. I was living in Winnipeg. You know, people look at me now, and over the years, they're just like, you're such a totally different person. You know, in the past, in my 20s and early 30s after Barry died, it was like, you know, okay, I got my cards read occasionally, or, you know, got a palm read, but that was about it. And I always had this sense sometimes of, well, I just know stuff every once in a while, but that was about it. I really didn't pay attention to it. And in Canmore, it was during one of my what I would call quote unquote mental health days. So the kids got on the bus and I pretended to go to work, and I turned around and went home. And that day I walked uptown and I found a brochure on Reiki, and I read about, you know, relaxation and relieving stress. And I was like, oh my God, like, all I need to do is relieve all my stress. So taking the course, having a treatment, it was really the first time that I felt peaceful and calm and protected. And what I love about the Reiki, and this is really where I lean in a lot of the work that I do, is the simplicity of it. You don't have to be practicing for 20 years and be this guru. It literally is laying on of hands. And that was the first time, and you don't even have to touch a person. That was the first time that I really felt like I could actually feel something. And it was the feeling of the energy flowing. And I was first questioning that and going, okay, am I feeling this or I'm not feeling this? But the energy itself goes where it needs to. I don't have to know anything except for being in service.
And how does that tie with the labyrinth?
So the labyrinth work that I do in between the two, the energy blends so very well because there's always an intention being set. And Reiki is very similar to that. And there is energetic medicine inside the labyrinth. So there is only one choice to be made, whether you're going to step in or not. And that's it.
And so what would it do for me to do the labyrinth? What does it help me with?
Oh, there is so much in there that allows you to feel calm and quiet. So it stops that chatter. And it is truly a walking meditation. You get this centeredness. And as you're walking towards the center, that's where the magic starts happening in the medicine, where the left brain gets so occupied that you start having abstract thinking. And you get this sense of groundedness and strength comes there. And with that, the feedback that I get all the time is, I feel so aligned and strong when I was walking out of the center. And, some people have really deep spiritual experiences. And some people just feel like, I don't even have to think right now. I can just feel and feel centered and grounded. It stops a lot of the, stress and feeling of overwhelm.
And you and I talked about this, the meditation.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my gosh, the first time I tried meditating, it was hysterical. I was actually texting my friend because it was so hilarious. Like the chatter gets so loud.
It does, right? It's like the
chicken.
Yeah.
Oh, people. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh. So I can't wait to try the labyrinth because I was talking about this with you and how I get super creative when I drive.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is where most of my big ideas have come from.
Absolutely.
And I can totally see how the labyrinth would do this. Like I am very excited to come to. So do you do workshops or just people book a time, or how does that work with the labyrinth?
So there a combination of, I do workshops, absolutely. And that's really where my big calling is. I really love facilitating the workshop and helping people increase their self-awareness, because it really is about self-reflection inside the labyrinth. And, they get to focus on, I get to choose this and I get to filter out all these things that are going on. So yes, I do. Right now I'm doing 1-day intro workshops, a couple of hours, and you get to have a taste of that. And then I do a further deep dive. We get into there's 3 phases of the labyrinth in order to walk. There's like an intention setting and so on, and we dig deeper into that. And it really is all about preparing yourself for deeper self-reflection. And
that sounds so fun.
Yeah, and I'm really excited is what I have booked, and it's coming up, and I'm actually starting to fill the spaces. So I'm really excited about this. Is I'm doing a new moon goddess walk.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it's it's coming up December 7th, and it will be in the evening. And I'm going to blend some of that goddess energy and fun and dance and.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, of course, people may be listening to this podcast 2 years from now. So
true. That's true.
So, for the goddess, what did you call it? Goddess?
A new moon goddess walk. And I really want to.
Goddess walk.
Yeah, it's about rebirth and bringing that moon energy in. So that's something that I want to do on a regular basis, and also monthly walk where it's just a drop in.
Cool. So if people want to find out any information about your workshops or the Reiki or all of the wonderful work that you do, where can they find you?
They can find me at soultrek.me. So that's soul, SOULTREK.me, M-E.
Wonderful.
And
now,
there's stuff about the labyrinth on there. There's stuff about Reiki courses, events, and the different services that I provide.
Great. Now, before we go, one more question. How did losing your husband with young children, how did that experience make you a better human being? What's the positive thing you took out of that?
You know, the positive thing that I took away from that is realizing that even despite everything that showed up for me over the years, and especially Barry dying, when I show up with an open heart and be in service, I get to serve others from a place of compassion and self-awareness. And that allows me to have such compassion for other people. And I just love watching others. I get it. I understand what it's like to be in that place of trauma or confusion or conflict. And there is another side. There's totally another side to life.
Well, I think it definitely made you more powerful.
I feel that way. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? And other times I'm like, this is what I do. This is what I do. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That is one very powerful story. Thank you for sharing.
You, Bridget. Thank you so much, Bridget. I really, really appreciate you having me on the podcast. And Women Talk has really been a big part of what I do, and having that tribe of women that are so supportive. Thank you for bringing that forward to the world and having us share this together.
I am the lucky one because I get to surround myself with incredible women like you. So thank you.
That's great. Well, thank you, Bridget.
Have a fabulous day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
You too. Take care.
If you have a burning desire to share your story with our audience, apply to be on our podcast. To apply and find a full list of our podcasts, go to www.womentalk.ca.